mean?
That's what I'm doing.
Who do you have thought with right now? Wait, we need podcast. Damn it.
I mean, porque no las dos.
All right, you ready to go?
Yeah, let's
do this. And welcome to the pod, everyone.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today's February 16th. It's the week of February 16th. Brief introductions aside, as most of you have just heard, we have a new voice this week on the podcast.
Yeah, we do.
Hello, everybody.
Benjamin Sherman, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm Ben Sherman. I go to school with both Adam and Brett, depending on the semester. But
keep it short, though. This is an intro.
I'm graduating. I'm doing the internship in Jeff City right now. Very exciting. Very cool.
Well, Ben's our resident research monkey, so he's going to be around making appearances from time to time. But for this week's podcast, we got a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do. Amazingly, we're back on a weekly schedule.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed, hopefully. So we're gonna make this. We're gonna do this right again. Anyways,
we're gonna bring you some federal news, some state news, as promised, as per usual.
I don't think we're crossing the pond or the Delaware this podcast.
No.
Well, actually, take that back. We're always crossing the Delaware.
I was gonna say. Before we burn past our intro music, we're gonna get to all the subject we get to today. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll hope to catch you up on your week and at the very least make it a little informative and a little entertaining.
Yep, that's the goal.
So, as Adam would say, without much further to do,
let's get into it.
So I think the first topic we plan on covering today, we gonna attack that national emergency.
Hell
absolutely.
Yeah,
it's the most pertinent thing.
No, it is. So everyone, we avoided a shutdown, which means Brett and I are doing the pod.
Yeah, this episode is being brought to you by...
I was really looking forward to it.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe by the end of this year we'll be into season 3.
Maybe. We'll see. But anyways, basically, we avoided it because Trump folded, and we're here.
Yeah.
So... I guess that's all the analysis we need to go into, right?
All the deep analysis.
There's no shutdown. And
as we touched on last week, the government needed to pass an actual budget before Friday in order to stay open. They passed a continuing resolution back in January to open it up till now. And the big point of contention was going to be talks on the border wall and whether or not the Democrats were going to approve any sort of money in the budget to approve the border wall.
Well, they did.
They did approve some money.
Very minute amount, respectable amount.
Yeah, it was 1.375?
1.375 billion in funding for the border wall. That's in the bill that was passed.
Right, and it's not even for a wall.
No, I believe it's pedestrian fencing.
No, it was 55 miles of our 2,000-mile border.
Hey, man, this is going to make the difference, all right?
It's going to make a difference.
Every minute bit counts, apparently.
So... Okay, basically, to recap all of this, Trump initially wanted $5.4 billion to actually fund the entire wall. 5.7?
5.7.
$5.7 billion.
God, paying off already, Ben.
Research monkey.
That's what we have you here for. Basically, would not sign a deal without one, caused the initial shutdown, and then this was basically just the looming threat that he wouldn't sign anything without this, and then our... Art of the Deal in chief.
Hey, whoa.
Agreed. Basically agreed to this. He said he, was reviewing it. Didn't want another shutdown. He was like, if we cause another shutdown, it's the Democrats' fault this time, even though, he fucked up both times and it would be his fault. But regardless, doesn't matter whose fault it is because our president is still an idiot.
The thing is, on that note, it's amazing. The story of how we got here is just absurd in the end. Because he almost had, $25.4 billion in his first 2 years, but he just didn't want to agree to a deal, right?
Well, even with the first budget that he denied, they gave him more money.
We gave him wasn't it
fencing along the border?
It was almost the entire. It was the DACA. It was protection for DACA, and the proposed. It was almost like half the amount.
I want to say it was 12 or something like that.
It was a shit ton of money that we were willing to give him for the border wall. So, we were willing to fund the entire wall.
People have been asking him this exact question, like, why didn't you accomplish this when you had the entire Congress in your favor? And his answer was
Fox News,
essentially like, oh, Paul Ryan, that guy, just couldn't get it done.
Yeah, I mean, of course, he's passing the blame onto everybody that's not him, but. The moral of the story is that leadership from both the House and Senate got together and found some sort of solution that would be acceptable to both
amiable.
the House and the Senate. Yeah. And then pass it along to Trump. Trump, who's not keen to see another shutdown happen after he is going to get blamed for the longest shutdown in American history, says, I'll sign this, but yet. There's still plenty of time left.
He's on a track to set some serious records if he hasn't already set some.
So he signs it, and immediately, well, he's not officially signed it, but as soon as it gets to his desk, he says, look, I'll probably sign it. I'm not happy about it. Oh, and I'm probably going to declare a national emergency to build the wall anyway.
Well, no, then... But then he
comes out and says it. Yeah, but that was like a couple days later.
Yeah.
And that happened like yesterday.
Via the Notes app. I learned this today. They literally sent out this press release. Also because the White House is no longer caring. Yeah, because they're no longer hosting press conferences. Which,
that's a sign of an effective
working
place.
Love transparency in government.
Oh, yeah.
You mean the Missouri voters.
We're not talking about Clean Mo right now, all right? We need to get
I was going to say.
God dang.
We could get into that, too.
We could.
That is also...
a fair amount of
we'll cover that in the state.
Though. We're on Fed.
Yeah. Let's keep the federalism alive.
There you go. Separate them.
Yeah. And so now there's the big debate on Trump is going to declare a national emergency, or at least attempt to, in order to build the wall.
Has he not already?
Ben, he did declare. But Ben, walk us through the process of what happens when this does occur.
Of when the national emergency gets occurred.
When he declares it, what are the next steps? How does he get to the wall?
So, he's already said he didn't need to, which is just absurd. He came out in that Rose Garden rant, if anybody was following that, and said, I didn't need to do this, but I want it done faster rather than slower. So, to get it done faster, I'm going to do this, which is just absurd. But in the end, I think he's going to end up grabbing about $8 million in funding for his wall from a slew, or $8 billion, sorry.
I was going to say, yeah.
From a slew of different funding sources, ranging from military contracts, military construction contracts, from the Treasury, I believe the forfeiture fund, and then from a few other places, if I can find it in my notes.
Just minor little places to nickel and dime.
He's grabbing $3.6 billion from military construction projects. I'm positive, and it's very weird because even senators and the military contractors have said this is not good for the country, and it's going to be negatively affecting a slew of other projects that money was originally allotted for.
Which is it's fine. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely not. I steal money from a little here, a little there.
I constantly feel like that dog meme where it's just a house burning around him. Everything is fine.
Funniest thing, I was listening to Love It or Leave It this morning, and they made the same fucking reference.
It's so.
I mean, that's what it's been. That's what it's been since 2016.
Yeah,
the house is just burning down around us. But
basically, it's fine.
So now the
White House has been burning down around us.
The White House has been burning down, right?
Just to bring it back to our little history lesson.
The one area he didn't seize that he probably could have was the hurricane relief funds for Texas and Puerto Rico, but good on him for at least not trying to grab at that.
Wow. Do we have any money there? Was there any money for him to potentially grab from?
I'm not sure,
but I
know
that Florida and Texas.
It was it wasn't off the table.
No.
Yeah, but Puerto Rico's been horribly in debt. Like, they're still feeling the effects from Hurricane Maria last year.
Yeah.
Regardless.
I'm unaware if they've even completely fixed the electrical grid.
They're definitely not 100%.
No, absolutely not. And we don't care. So
they don't even vote for president.
The next question, though, is now that this has happened, and now that we have an idea of what's going to happen, is he going to get away with this?
My answer, I believe, is no. But it's just going to be so much time until that answer is definitive or not.
Yeah, but great. Basically, I think, and the reason for that is because these national emergencies can be tried in court, and this kind of this appropriating money to things that it wasn't appropriated for is also it raises a lot of legal questions, and that's why this
unconstitutional questions.
Yeah, and whether or not this is legal. I think constitutional will be the deciding factor in whether or not this wall gets built.
I think the biggest challenges he's going to have in the court system appear to be from the ACLU on one hand, suing it whether or not he can actually declare a national emergency in the absence of one, and then his attempts to declare eminent domain on the property on the Texas border to build these 55 miles of pedestrian fences.
Yeah, because it's in the plan that the local municipalities that this wall is going to run through have to approve the wall.
I'm not
which is
Yeah.
fucking crazy. Which I mean,
Yeah.
it's very smart because obviously these people should have a say of whether or not a goddamn
Giant
2,000-mile wall goes up in their backyard. It's a very good.
It's really
also,
an eyesore
the
at the
American
end of the
people
day.
should have a say in why, in a wall being, 2,000-mile wall being built in our backyard. Because
Right.
importantly, though, is because what this does is it effectively stops that from happening. Because our elected representatives are not able to vote on it in the direct way that we have given them the power to.
It changes fundamentally how the national emergency works and how a president can interact with their Congress.
Yeah.
Just based on from now on, I mean, Adam and I were talking prior to the beginning of the podcast, a president can, in the absence of getting what he demands for his campaign or what he campaigns on, can then declare a national emergency for whatever he wants to get. So in the future, we could see, I think I had read, like, an Elizabeth Warren demanding a Green New Deal, or
Yeah,
a Bernie
but-
Sanders. Yeah.
I think it's important to note that this isn't new behavior. I mean, very famously, Truman attempted to seize the... No, was it Truman or FDR? FDR attempted to seize the steel mills during the Second World War. No,
It was FDR.
Truman.
It was Truman during the Korean War.
Yeah, that's what it was.
It was Truman during the Korean War, tried to nationalize steel mills in order to keep up production,
Well-
and the Supreme Court turned him down. I mean, it's the expansion of the executive that goes directly against the constitutional separation of powers, and this is no exception.
Well, like-
the difference is this is a fabricated emergency.
Well-
We were in a war then. We're not in a war now.
See, that's the ticket, though, is that there's similar national emergencies declared by Bush and his son in the face of invading Iraq and then after 9/11. But these are all in faces of massive national emergencies, objective national emergencies,
Yeah.
I'm going to add.
I was gonna
I love
and
it's so
military
dismissive.
action.
You go Bush and his son.
And his
the other
son.
president, his son.
There's two of them. I got them all mixed up, all right?
Bush 1 and 2. Well, no, I mean, granted though, like
Bush 2, Electric Boogaloo.
it just basically what this strikes me as is it's an executive order on steroids.
Yes.
And granted, like we all know how much Republicans hated when Obama did an executive order to like make a certain day a recognition day or some shit like that. So basically, like what I have found amusing is our great elected Republican senators and their responses to Trump actually doing this.
I mean, like,
And
even...
declaring this, like Chuck Grassley's, I don't think this is a good idea. Roy Blunt's, I have some concerns.
Yeah.
Lindsey Graham's, like, I wish he didn't do this. Like, there are some really great, basically.
None of the heavy hitters seem to think,
Oh,
my God, we had never thought of this before.
This is awful. Yeah.
My God, it's Jason Bourne.
The response has been, oh no, I don't like this, but I'm not going to do anything about it.
In this
I
moment,
mean,
not
I hate to be-
Okay. That's the Republican like elected official response to Trump in general, though.
I do hate to be this person though, but like at least they're coming out like, don't get me wrong.
just because it's a
shit
small-
answer. It's a shit answer, but at least they're not like blindly jumping behind
like,
him like
"This
they've
is
done
fine."
on everything else.
Well, this
Like
is the
the
thing,
tax
though, is-
cuts that have fucked over every American,
But I
as
think-
we're seeing now in tax return
But
season.
basically, what they do though is the fact that it's just like I'd rather have them say nothing at all than come out and be like, "Oh no," and then fucking vote for it when it comes
Yeah,
up in the Senate.
that's true.
It's just
They know
like,
it's unpopular. They're gonna vote for it anyway.
it's like the reason that you hate like Jeff, like
liars.
that too.
I mean, I don't like liars.
Well, you're in the minority on that one, Ben.
Oh.
Unlike democracy, this is tyranny of the majority.
See, this is the thing. It's not tyranny of the majority, unless if there's protections
No, so
for
I'm
the
saying
minority.
democracy is not tyranny.
It's
of the
the
majority.
will of the majority with protections for
Well.
the minority.
All
But,
right,
but this is the
Aristotle.
hopeful.
Let's
This
get
is the
out.
hopeful thing, is that the House of Representatives and the Senate will both vote on whether or not they approve of this declaration of a national emergency. As we were discussing earlier, as Ben pointed out, though they might both vote the emergency down, Trump can still implement it anyway, and then it becomes a court battle,
Well,
which I don't even have faith that the Senate's gonna
Trump could
vote it down.
veto.
Yeah, Trump could veto any resolution that would vote down his executive order. And then the ultimate question is, when it gets to the Supreme Court, what does SCOTUS do? And,
Right.
I mean, do we still believe in, quote-unquote, swing Justice Roberts to back this
Kennedy.
decision? Or,
Kennedy.
Kennedy's gone.
Well, Kennedy's gone.
Oh,
It's okay.
Oh,
You can still be
fuck.
sad over it.
Oh,
It's all right.
damn.
Yeah, Brett Kavanaugh. I try to forget it too.
I love how he's a lobster last week tonight.
Hell yeah.
But yeah, it's whether or not we believe in Roberts' ability to deny Trump the wall, essentially. And I don't know. I don't know what I think about that one. He did just have that decision last week on the Louisiana abortion case, but I don't know going forward what his stance is going to be, because he's not exactly a liberal icon in any.
No, oh god, no. This Supreme Court season's been really interesting, and I think that would warrant a discussion in and of itself of what's been going on there. But yeah, I don't think it is necessarily a safe bet to say that they're just going to fall in line with whatever he's doing, because they've shown that to be the contrary. They're being independent relatively.
We've
speaking.
seen that they won't necessarily get in lockstep with the president,
Right,
but they're all
right.
the five conservative members of the court are reliably conservative in almost every regard at this point.
I think what's going to be really interesting is the divide that will occur within. If this does go to the Supreme Court, I will. You mean Kavanaugh, of course, has talked about presidential powers and the expansion of presidential powers, and that is, we know reliably where he will fall. I think, interestingly, the one person the one other Republican that you could potentially see go and fall in line with the Democrats in this regard would be Gorsuch. And I say that because I don't think Scalia would have ever voted for this.
No.
I mean, I would be hard-pressed to find a conservative that would vote for executive expansion of power.
Yeah, but
So that's the thing, is
but
how do they suit this argument to get those justices on board?
I think what it really comes down to is expanding executive power for our current administration. And of course, under many other circumstances, this would not be an issue, but the fact that Trump has been able to appoint 2 members of this body, one of them, I think, is potentially voting against it. There seems to be,
Fingers crossed, just 2.
it will be interesting to see. I could see this is going to be a 5-4 decision regardless.
I don't know. I'm not confident on that.
I don't know.
I'm
I'm very pessimistic when it comes to the Supreme Court because they've always let me down.
You're fair. I think if this was seated under like the War Powers Act or something, if he said we're declaring war on Mexico and need to build this wall,
I don't think
maybe
people would get behind that. I want to believe
the Supreme
Americans
Court
wouldn't be behind
might
that.
side with them. Well, the American people would not be behind that. They're not behind the national emergency right now. But if he
I
were
want
to
to say
try
a
to
poll from. I want to say a poll from Fox News, if I can find it, found that 20% of Republicans are not in favor of the national emergency, and 56% of Americans disapprove. And that's about the most Republican estimate you can get. This book
amazing.
says that this is not going to go well.
God damn.
So this is the fight we have coming up here pretty soon. This will be the big thing that controls the headlines, is whether or not Trump gets his wall. Now, everything we've kind of described, like the court process obviously is not quick. Eminent domaining people's property is not a quick process either. And of course, as that happens, those people are going to try to sue the president. The House of Representatives is most likely going to join a lawsuit. The ACLU, as we mentioned. So the odds of this happening before 2020, I say, are
Oh, no. There's
infinitesimally
astronomically
small.
And granted, I think this is actually largely the point of it, is the fact that Trump doesn't want the wall to be built.
I don't think he wants it. He just wants the fight over it.
If Trump ever wants the wall built, it will be in his last year of president. If he gets a
Fingers
second
crossed
term.
that's in a year.
If he gets a second
5
term.
years from now, when he gets a second term,
Hey,
yeah, probably.
There's a solid chance it happens, friends.
So, if Howard Schultz has anything to say about it,
I'd say about 50.
well, we'll get into that
What a segue.
later.
What a segue. I mean,
Oh my god.
yeah,
but-
so that's
Yeah, because Ben.
that's the big thing from this week.
I wanted to talk about whether or not there actually was an emergency, but I guess we can get into it another time.
There's not an emergency.
But there's just
border
decidedly
crossings
not.
are at like an all-time low.
They're down from 1.6 million in 2000, and I think this year there was 130,000 in FY 17 or 18. So it's down so long. The crime rate along 23 border counties is some of the lowest in the United States. In fact, 35% lower homicide rates in non-border counties than in border counties. Like, it's just, there is no,
Per capita?
I believe so.
That's crazy. Because also, like, no one lives there. So, like...
A
but
ton
if
of
it's,
people live down on the border.
like... Okay.
I mean, don't get me wrong, they're all poor immigrants.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
they're
like,
not
the city...
industrial
yes,
hubs.
you're right. I
but
mean, like,
people live down
there are cities that are down there, but, like, large expanse of the border, the large amount of the 2,000 miles is very, very rural.
Very empty.
Yeah, especially because it would also be nearly impossible to build a wall through part of it because it is that the terrain is just so
Tell him anything's impossible and he will try. I believe.
Here's another fun tangent that's related to news from this week. El Chapo was actually surprisingly convicted in New York this week.
All charges. Every
yeah,
single
all
one
like
of them.
what? Yeah, there was a whole bunch that he got
6,000.
charged with. I mean, he'll be in prison for the rest of his life. He's being sent to that maximum security prison in Colorado, the one that's built into the mountain. So
I hope
have
he
fun
can build a
tunneling
tunnel
out of
through
that.
the mountain. Yes.
Honestly,
Do we have any other important items to get to in terms of...
We have been debating this idea, and we figured it'd be appropriate to bring it onto the pod. This is something that Adam and I feel very passionately about from two diametrically opposed points of view. And that is the concept of the filibuster
Hell
in the
yes.
Senate. So, Adam, introduce us to this argument.
Okay, so many people know that a staple of senates across this United States is the fundamental difference between the House and the Senate. Not only the number and the issue of fiscal bills.
The House
Fiscal ability.
Origination.
Yeah, they're
Basically,
areas of jurisdiction.
is the idea of the filibuster, which is a Senate rule that basically any senator is allowed to speak for. There's no limits on debates. They may speak for as long as they would like. However, little known is that all of that is actually set by the Senate rules, which usually has to be adopted by the Senate itself by a simple majority. So this idea was brought up and brought to our attention by another pod, which we don't ever need to reference because it's the only one that we ever talk about. And a former Obama speechwriter that talked about this.
Now I know what you're talking about.
John Favreau. Is the idea of getting rid of the filibuster in 2020 to adopt basically like the Democratic agenda wishes that will require a 60% or a 60% or 60 yay votes to pass the Senate. And Brett and I talked about this because it's a simple rule change and whether or not it would be in terms of getting your wishes and agenda passed, which has been very timely with the emergency going on currently, or with the declared emergency. Whether or not this is a good idea and kind of the merits of getting rid of the filibuster.
So the last time the filibuster was really brought to national attention, I mean, it is every so often, but famously in Obama's final years in office, when the Senate and House were both controlled by Republicans, the Senate Republicans brought to a vote a rule change that would make it so that you only needed 51 votes in the reconciliation budget process to overturn a filibuster. And that's a whole bunch of fancy words, but basically what had happened was that the Republicans wanted to push through this really horrendous proposed budget, and they knew they weren't going to have the votes. And they tried to do it in this process called reconciliation, which made it so they didn't need as many votes as you need in a normal budget process anyway. And then they realized that the Democrats were going to filibuster it. So in order to prevent that, they changed some of the rules. This has been proposed again now that the Democrats have won back some control about changing some of the rules of the filibuster. And the reason it exists right now and it's contentious is that it really does give one senator the power to bring the whole machine to a stop. And the reason that I think we need to keep the filibuster, and right now one of the debates is to keep it at, you need 60 votes to stop someone from filibustering. So all 60 members of the Senate, or not all 60 members of the Senate need to vote to say, hey, shut up, sit down, let's move on and vote on this thing. I think that's good. I think it's good to keep it there, and I think it's good to keep the filibuster, because what the filibuster does is it makes it that the intent of the Senate is to be the deliberative body. That's why there's only 100 of them. They all have great autonomy. They have great power. It's meant so that we prevent the tyranny of the majority. We prevent the 53 Republicans in the Senate from just doing whatever the fuck they want because they have the 51 votes they need to pass things. It allows people to take a principled stand on things. And now where people would say, okay, well, that means that anyone can be an obstructionist. Well, no, if all 60 people are in agreement, they can overturn the one crazy person. But what it does is it gives the minority a bargaining chip to say, hey, if you don't come to the table and talk to us about this, we're just going to gum up the works and nothing's going to get done. And it's really tempting to say, hey, odds are Democrats are going to take power here pretty soon. We know it's not going to be by a lot. And we have these lofty ideas like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All, things that are going to just be bitter political battles that the Republicans are going to fight us tooth and nail on. So, okay, maybe we should overturn the rules, get rid of the filibuster, or at least decrease the number of votes it takes to override it so that we can prevent them from stopping these good things from happening. And that's where Adam and I are differing.
I mean,
Yeah.
I would say at the end of the day, it's hard to recognize that the Congress was not designed to be a fast-moving institution. It was designed to be slow and to adapt to change. Now that's what?
No, you're fine. You're fine.
Oh,
You
yeah.
keep going.
It's designed to be slow to adapt to change. It's definitely a Burkean institution. And as much as I'd like to say, like, yes, these important pieces of legislation, like the Green New Deal, like Medicaid for All, need to be passed. However, we need to reach a point where people, in a mass sense, believe that. So to have eliminate the filibuster, so it makes it easier for anyone to put forth larger pieces of legislation, puts everybody at risk for what happens next. It's the same issue as we're addressing with the power of this national emergency thing. It's not necessarily who's doing what with it now, but what could happen tomorrow.
And okay, so here's the point that I want to make, though, is the fact that when there are times, and I don't think this should become ever a regular occurrence, but there are plenty of things that we've passed with this, like the Trump tax cuts were passed through reconciliation. Obamacare was passed through reconciliation. Like, there are these major pieces of legislation on both sides here have used this method. What I think we should do, because I think that there is no way that we're getting to 60 votes, regardless of how hard we bargain for a Green New Deal or anything that would be in any way
wouldn't be so sure.
effective. I don't think so. I'm just also pessimistic when it comes to hope in the Republican Party. So, or in their ability to actually be, forthcoming and see the fact that we only have 10 more years to live.
12 years. 12 years to live.
So,
Thank God.
Thank you, Ben. We have 2 more years because of you. So, what I think that, because it would be, what I hope and what I really envision seeing in 2020, Democratic president, Democratic Senate, Democrats keep the House. We're back in control, baby. We got the trifecta.
Don't jinx it.
Yeah. So, but it would really suck to see us work so hard for all of that and then not be able to pass Medicare for All and not be able to pass what we want. And also, because you look at governments around the world that are structured with the parliamentarian system, they will always have just a majority to pass these things, and their systems work just fine, unless you're French.
Some may argue better, but
So, yeah, arguably...
Brexit's going really well.
That was a referendum. We'll talk about that later. Actually, that's something I would like to...
right now.
We're gonna talk about that when it comes to Missouri, because
the internet.
there's something...
Yeah, we're going to talk about Brexit when it comes to Missouri.
No, we're talking about the referendum process. I need to find this article. But regardless,
Facepalm.
I don't... what I also don't want to see is, our president, insert Democrat here, not be able to pass what they want and have to do it through less conventional, less constitutional means. Because the Senate gets to set their own rules. And what I think we really should do is consistently hold the threat of getting rid of the filibuster over the Republicans' head. Because what that basically does is holds what power it lets them know that whatever power they do hold as the minority could be taken away at any moment. And yes,
You know what you sound
this
like right
might-
now?
What?
You sound like someone who's a fan of the debt ceiling. And the fact that we have to re-vote on that every year.
re-vote on that every year.
Because it's an arbitrary thing. The filibuster, in another sense, is something that, again, I just have such an issue with the whole fact of, I acknowledge that these are great pieces of legislation that need to happen, but let's not shut up a legitimate viewpoint
see, and that's
from the rest
why-
of the country to accomplish it. That's not good.
Granted, I think that
I think the best avenue, or what's happening now, I would applaud. Where, as not necessarily a fan of AOC, I respect that she's put this on the table now. Because it's not going to get passed now. But at least it's in the zeitgeist until we get to 2020 and beyond. And hopefully we can get it passed then. So it's hopefully gathering support, and this piece of legislation, these large, far-reaching bills and whatnot, will hopefully grab and gather consent and favor in the national debate over time. So we don't necessarily have to threaten this yearly, we'll get rid of the filibuster, where we can slowly move towards, all right, let's pass a Green New Deal with 10 years left on our lifespan. But that's at least my less scholarly opinion.
I mean, I really, like, this is the thing that you said this, Brett, is that we need to pass these things. And granted, I think that it's okay to be a little constitutionally loose, to actually...
Loosey-goosey?
Because it's not unconstitutional to do these things. Like, it is an expansion of the legislature's power, not the president's. And while I have mixed feelings upon that, I think that basically, to save the world, I'm okay with getting rid of the filibuster.
That's not an expansion of legislative power. That's decreasing legislative power. You're taking power away from legislators.
Semantics.
It gives power to the majority in the legislature.
Right, that's not what we want. That's specifically not what we want.
Yeah, granted, like, I don't think we should do this for every piece of legislation, obviously.
Eliminating the
and
filibuster
I think
would
that
give
it
power
should
to
be...
the minority.
No, eliminating the filibuster would take away power from the minority.
So okay, but here's what I'd counter with. If passing something like the Green New Deal or passing Medicare or Medicaid for all would be impossible under our current structure, if with the filibuster still being in place, would make that impossible.
Yeah.
Then I'm not saying let's change the rules in order to get it through. Let's find ways that are palatable for the majority of Americans to pass these things. So maybe we implement them piecemeal. I mean, I think Obamacare would have been an incredibly successful piece of legislation if it wasn't all just done in one fell swoop. Now, would he have been able to accomplish it given congressional makeup?
No.
That's up for debate. But what we saw was this horribly bastardized version put in. I mean, it's helping people now.
But at least it got people behind,
I think-
all right, we do need to protect pre-existing conditions.
And that kind of... I think really what you have to think of is the fact that, like, some of this parts of Obamacare were not implemented all at once, and they had to be voted upon as they went through the process,
Right.
which is the reason that Joe Lieberman
Lieberman
can go... there's
can,
a lot
can
of...
screw up. It was a public option that he said no.
He can go fuck off.
Public buy-in for 50 and older.
Yeah, so basically, and which also would have saved a lot of people a hell of a lot of money. What I think is very important to realize here is the fact that the reason that Obamacare is not, or that the Affordable Care Act is not nearly as effective as it should be, is because Republicans have undermined it and underfunded it and have done a shit ton to basically make it as awful as possible. They are the reason it's bad, not the legislation.
I agree.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, the execution of it's bad. It's been awful the entire time. I mean, even when poor Kathleen Sebelius was the Secretary of Health and Human Services in charge of implementing the damn thing, she couldn't even successfully do it.
We should get a website up.
Yeah.
There are just so many issues with Obamacare. But my point is that, maybe keeping these things in place, and again, we don't know what the political landscape is going to look like in 4 to 8 years, when we're actually faced with the immediacy of something that's only, 12 years away.
I mean, it's pretty
the
immediate
death
now.
of all of us.
I'll give that to Adam.
But okay, tell that to the politicians who think nothing's going to happen.
It's snowing outside right now. Global warming cannot be real.
You're right.
Sorry, global whamming. My bad.
I just think we might have to do this the harder way. Keeping the filibuster is going to force us to do this the harder way.
We may lose,
and that's tough. We might lose.
Pacific
we might
Islands,
really fuck some things up.
but-
we might lose the East and West Coast. Kansas might now be the only
Republicans
place
would be pretty
that's not
happy about
underwater.
that. I mean, maybe that's their strategy. Solve global warming when California and Florida are underwater.
I think the struggle in the democratic process is worth upholding to not open the gate for majority tyranny, even if the cause is one that I thoroughly believe is in everyone's best interest. I think it's really good that we're having these conversations, because I think these are the kinds of conversations that need to be happening. We know what the future should be, but let's face the realities of what it's going to be and establish what our game plan is going to be for that. Yeah. So these will be the tough questions that we're faced with, but we've come up with good ideas before. I think we can do it again.
Yeah, well, basically, Brett, my one rebuttal to this is the fact that I think you've been out of the Senate too long.
My friend, I've never actually left. I've been hiding in the rafters the entire time.
Up in the
I live in the dome.
All right, so welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Nice little break there. So now that we've
Ben
taken
providing the color commentary.
most of
Bang,
our
bang.
time devoted towards, this podcast towards federal issues, we'll finally jump down to the state level and talk about the great state of Missouri.
The great state of Missouri.
So,
As they do.
yes, exactly. So anyways, Missouri's facing a lot of issues right now. When Brett and I have touched upon the issues with the Department of Revenue, the taxing, which is a major issue, the creation of our conservative caucus, which is still doing great things, and
I'm going to disagree with that.
I don't think they've been doing anything good, actually.
yeah, the budget, and then the two things we're going to talk about today, we're going to go back into the budget and talk a bit more about that. It's also because Ben has been in literally every single budget hearing.
I will take that hit for all of you, so you don't have to.
Yes. And because they usually go 6-7 hours at a
Oh,
time.
no, much longer than that.
Or longer. There was one that was 13.
I work in the budget committee from 8:15 in the morning typically until about 9 o'clock at night on most days.
And then
been fun.
we're also going to get into some of the proposed initiative petitions that Republicans in Missouri have pushed forward, or the RNC of Missouri, the RMC.
The Republican Party of Missouri.
Yeah, I don't know if you could have a national convention in a state.
As I said, the RMC.
Semantics.
Missouri Committee. No, basically what it, and the awful things that our great grand old party is proposing. So let's get into it.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, we discussed. I know you have discussed in previous podcasts the governor's main focus on infrastructure and workforce development. So I assume I am aware that at least you've talked about the bonding being done for the first half of that, or the infrastructure.
Assume that we've talked about nothing.
The $351 million.
$350 million bond that's going to be issued, but that also comes with the fact that when you pay off said bond, it comes with interest because it's basically paying on credit. So at the end of the day, you spend another $100 million paying for the interest on that bond, plus a few more fringe costs to pay for that bond. So you're spending an astronomical amount to not increase spending, which is a contradictory statement, I would argue. And it's just a very silly situation. Not that I don't want to get behind bridges and infrastructure in your roadways, because as somebody who's from Illinois, I do like being able to drive on a flat road that's in any sort of condition. But yeah, like the fear of increasing spending is just so rampant. It's almost absurd.
Well, also the state is beautifully limited in their capacity to at least increase the percentage of taxation.
I just love that. That's the
due to Hancock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For any spending increase, you have to have a taxing increase. What is that called? It's not pay for play.
Pay for play. Yeah.
Is that pay for?
Yeah.
That's what they
Yeah.
did.
So
Yeah.
pay for play is just
It's the non-technical
a
term.
wonderfully silly piece of legislation.
Yeah. Or the what do we have in Missouri? What is the rule? It's like the not Huff.
There's the Hancock
The
Amendment.
Hancock Amendment. That's what it is. So
Yeah.
basically, if you raise taxes in any regard, that the entire state is to vote on it.
Well, it's the legislature cannot increase taxing rates above what they were in 1980. And if they were to, the Missouri people would have to approve it. That's why we got the things like the gas tax
And the-
in the last election.
Yes.
So the state's hamstrung by the fact that they can't raise tax revenues above the levels they were in 1980, and that anytime you have an expenditure increase, it has to go through this kind of tax approval process, and it's not easy to raise money in a state that has an increasing population, growing population, low unemployment rates, and decent economic growth, but no money.
Yeah. And the reason we have no money
What's
is
our
because
budget at? 28 trillion, I want to say.
Billion.
Trillion.
Sorry, not trillion.
This is
My
not
bad,
this
my
is
bad.
not a $1 trillion state.
This is not a $1 trillion.
This is
state.
not
My bad.
California.
Sorry.
Yeah, 28 billion.
Yeah, no, but and the reason we have so little is because Missouri just refuses to tax and basically just to take in revenue from the people in the state that have money.
Right.
And also we have shitty enough systems, infrastructure, and like economic like plans and development that take money out of our cities and that kind of thing, to the fact that we also don't have an increasing level of investment and people moving to the state, and then basically we need the workforce development to make Missouri more like attractive to big industry and that kind of thing.
Now I would say, I think it's my understanding that the Missouri economy is expanding at the moment, and there are people
Right.
moving to Missouri for bigger industry. But I would say this workforce development thing also has unintended consequences that I would like to also speak about.
Yeah.
Because in focusing on workforce development, Governor Parsons has created an increased focus on funding trade schools and getting people just into the workforce and not necessarily into high-paying jobs. So he's focused on trying to get people into especially welding and heavier industry like that. But
It's vocational training.
Yeah,
It's just
vocational
vocational
training.
training in
Those are
general.
And
Yeah.
importantly, I think something to really take note of is the fact that all of these, these things we mentioned, they're all jobs that require apprenticeship programs, and largely they are traditionally unionized positions. And Missouri's trying really
Traditionally.
fucking hard to get rid of the whole union thing.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get into that later because they're trying to do it again.
But there's this really interesting thought piece that's really prevalent in this workplace or workforce development strategy that the governor is attempting to implement, and it's something that kind of came out of the conservative think tanks from the 70s that started being implementing in the 80s and 90s, and it's basically the same concept. Yeah, it's still being used today because it's worked so well, and it's the same process. It's the same thought process that brought us. Trickle down economics, basically.
Oh, that worked out
Yeah,
well.
and so the way that Republicans and the way that Governor Parson is attempting to expand an economy is by making the state of Missouri more attractive to businesses in the hopes that they will move here, by doing things like cutting the business tax rates and giving tax breaks to businesses that relocate from across the Kansas border into Missouri, and doing these things that really try to it's a race to the bottom, essentially, in terms of making Missouri competitive. And while this sounds like, logically it sounds like a good thing, like trickle-down economics does, we have seen time and time and time again for the last 30, 40 years that it doesn't work.
Oh, not at all.
Businesses on a large scale are not attractive. If they were, Amazon would not have gone to New York.
Although
Granted,
they just
they're
quit
pulling
that.
out of it.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, that should be the perfect example. New York is not a low-tax state. It is a very blue state. It is a very high-tax state. And yet, businesses are still interested in moving there. And yet, we still see in the Midwest this thought process of saying, hey, if we just make ourselves this haven for businesses, they will come to us. And that's not the case. But that's the focus again.
I think what really is interesting to see is the fact that there are states that have high amounts of corporate investment and high amounts of industrial, not industrial per se, but like high amounts of like large corporation investment. And I'm going to harp on Indiana for a moment, because Indiana, as I like to say sometimes, is a red state that works basically because of this. But it doesn't happen on a rural basis. I was going to say, like, Indiana has one of the largest, or Indianapolis is one of the largest convention centers in the United States, basically because we have made ourselves attractive towards these kinds of programs of like hosting large events or having like large businesses being found, having their headquarters there and that kind of thing. And it's what it does is it basically creates these havens for big business and the real Republican constituents, the ones that they actually aid and help, which is not the majority of people or the people that vote for them. And it's interesting to see that there is such a large disparity, though, between people or states that have embarked on that kind of thing at a more urban level, and then you have states, possibly like Kansas, that have not done so.
Right.
Yeah, because I think Kansas is the greatest example of a state that's trying to develop a Republican constituency that utterly and entirely fails.
No, they're not trying to develop it. They have it. It's the place where the Republican ideas are happening and failing miserably.
That's what I'm trying. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's problematic.
Yep.
It's really scary. And my rant for Kansas in that same vein is, we want to talk about, this is kind of tying everything we've talked about together in the sense of expanding legislative powers or expanding executive powers and tax cuts and the idiocy of modern day conservatism or traditional conservatism. Kansas, as we all are very familiar with, just elected a Democratic governor.
Hell yeah.
We also were in the process up until just recently of pulling ourselves out of the brown bag tax experiment years, where he literally bankrupted our state a couple times over through the process of cutting taxes in an attempt to woo the businesses and corporate interests to come to Kansas. Well, in doing so, we cut so many taxes that we fell apart as a state. Well, now that we have a Democratic governor, the Senate President Susan Wagle has taken it upon herself to just seize an inordinate amount of power. She got rid of the committee in both the House and the Senate for taxation, made her own subcommittee, made herself the chair of it, and is now pushing some $200 million in tax cuts through the legislature. So,
What a great idea.
Yeah, we've seen tax cuts just be widely successful over the past 6 years. Things have just been super successful, especially on that the tax cuts affecting Missouri itself in the past couple months. That's been a fun discussion, at least in my committees. Between the tabling error, if you're not aware of, and the tax cuts, man, we just keep harping on it, and it's just so much fun.
And we're not even getting into the federal. We're not even getting into the mockery that has been the federal tax cuts.
That's what I would like to talk about if we were going to take a moment to talk about Missouri politics.
Get into it.
Yeah, if you want to touch on it.
Because I've hit on this in 2 different budget committees and in the Gov Oversight Committee, and it seems impossible for, not necessarily, I don't want to say Republicans, but just rightward thinking individuals to understand.
Conservatives.
Well, we've had Director Walters of the Department of Revenue in Missouri testify a number of times in front of committees on what is happening in Missouri. And currently there was a massive revenue shortfall. We were behind, I want to say about 10% in collections. And we're in a year that we're supposed to be up about 2%. And people are absolutely losing their minds over why this is happening. So the original culprit was this idea of the table error, which seems to be this overarching ghost and apparition that's just destroying Missouri's tax collections. And the idea was there was an error created in the 2004 tabling or tax tables that didn't account for the individual
Withholding.
The individual withholding. So if you were to claim only one exemption, one exemption being like a kid or something like that. Now, I'm not a tax expert, but this is my understanding. If you were to claim one exemption when you actually could claim 4 or more, or at least more than that, in order to get a bigger refund faster, the equation in the original Missouri tables did not account for this. But because of the way the Tax Cuts and Job Act was implemented and how it doubled the individual exemption.
You mean the Paul Ryan tax cut?
Sure. We'll go with that. Because of the way it doubled the individual exemption and then corrected the how you applied for exemptions, it was creating a much larger, albeit not actually it wasn't substantially impactful, issue with collections. So that was originally what everybody had been attacking. So we saw a number of representatives in the Budget Committee going after the department for this error that the people in charge now didn't have an effect on. The bigger issue, however, arose in what they called the new normal. And I mentioned what it is. It's generally that the way the taxes are collected and the way you can file for exemptions now is vastly changed, specifically how your W-4 works. And if you're interested in that, you're gonna have to do your own research on it.
But what the W-4 is how much you want the state to take out of your weekly, biweekly, or monthly paycheck.
So this idea of the April surprise, which I absolutely despise this term, but it's only growing in use, is that people are going to have it's terrible, either lower refunds. A member of the conservative caucus came up with that, and I thought it would die, and it's only...
Of course they did.
No, this is the... Continue. Sorry.
I'm not going to name him by name, but he came up with that. But the way the new normal works, is we have we're collecting less taxes and creating less revenue overall at the end of the day. So people are losing their minds because Missouri revenue collections is down when it should be up, and we're trying to correct that issue. And it's just been a giant headache that I've had to deal with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
Thanks, guys. That was my segment.
I'm trying to come up because obviously we gotta wrap this up here pretty soon.
I mean, we can
but
complain about like all these issues, lower collections at the end of the day. But who created the tax cuts?
We just might release just 2 separate episodes. I might have a federal and a Missouri episode for everyone.
I want to take this information and like have something to come away with it, because I don't think the answer to this problem is like, oh, well, obviously we just need to start taxing the crap out of people so we can stop having such broke states. But like,
at the end of the day,
for fuck's sake, conservatism used to be equitable with fiscal responsibility, and evidently someone hasn't been watching the barn, and all the horses have escaped.
With great power comes great responsibility, in the words of a great man.
And the fact that, real quick, the fact that this man is also still in charge of the Department of Revenue slightly bewilders me.
Well,
I don't. He will probably lose his.
I'm gonna disagree with you on that one, because there are already calls for him to resign or for him to be removed.
Yeah.
But in no way is, I mean, at least that I have been heard in my committees or in front of me, does it seem like he's at fault for these issues?
No, of course not. But the implementation, the alert system, also the fact that they sat on this information for letting the people know,
and they have
for quite a while.
Well, they haven't really sat on it either, but they haven't effectively communicated to the populace that, hey, your refunds are going to be lower, and your taxes, if you're in a normal person tax bracket, might actually be higher.
And what this is basically going to do is it's going to blow up in the face of Mike Parson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I'm waiting for that to happen.
The April surprise,
aka the honey.
So
not
like,
the comeback kid.
At the end of the day, when you cut taxes, you cut revenue. So it's just, that seems like a very difficult thing for some people to recognize.
Especially because last fiscal year, we had very conservative estimates of revenue, and we made far more money than we actually intended on doing so.
Predictions seem to lie that we're still going to be up about 1.7% on revenue collections this fiscal year. It's just taking some time to get there and to recover from, the 12-point deficit that we were at when session started meeting.
Yeah, basically, this is one of the issues that having a part-time legislature does. Is it basically means that we can't address these issues for 4 or 5 months after they initially occur. And that's a bit of an issue. Honestly, that is an issue and a topic for a different day.
I'd love to talk about all the things that have been cut that shouldn't have, or all the things that are getting funding that I like. Yeah. But I don't know if we're going to get to those. But I want to applaud at least Secretary Ashcroft in the face of massive budget cuts, his fervent defense of public libraries in Missouri.
Oh, hell yeah. I loved that committee.
Very much touched by his testimony there. Yeah. And on an issue I wasn't aware of, because as a college student, I love my library. And as we see, like, the wide-ranging effects that these libraries can have at the state level was fantastic, and I want to applaud him for going after that.
I was honestly, like, voter suppression aside, I was actually I was surprisingly very impressed with him, and I've been able to meet him once or twice.
Seems like a great guy.
Yeah, in the past couple of months or so, he's genuinely,
barring any future scandals, I believe him to be.
I was really surprised.
So I'm really hoping that, as we have more conversations like this, and as we discuss more of the actual real-world effects of these idealistic policies, it gives people a little more to think about in terms of 2020 with not just the federal level, but also their state and local level, because, these are obviously the things that affect everyday life. The money that your state has or doesn't have and the tax rates that your state does or doesn't charge directly affects everything you do on a day-to-day basis. And so keep in mind the voting records of these people and what they push for and the bills they sponsor and the ideas they have on the campaign trail, and just pay attention to these things because they affect your life directly, and they are just so incredibly and ungodly important. And that's the only way I can even imagine, I can conceive of wrapping all of this up, because God, it is just a headache.
Importantly, and this is something interesting, is that conservative members of the Senate have once complained that things are referendums and initiatives are only passed with about 17% of the vote, that is eligible to vote on these things. And interestingly, when you realize that some of our elected officials, especially statewide ones, are only elected with 17% of people actually voting that are eligible to vote for them. They only have that small amount, that small percentage of actually the people saying. And so not only is this, we need to pay more attention of what the hell, happens and occurs at our statewide level, because that affects us usually far more directly than any national legislation.
Right.
But also, we need to get people more engaged in it. And that's something that I think is...
I agree.
Is really important.
When only 30% of people generally vote regularly, that's a problem. And
Yeah.
it was brought to my attention this week that if each Missouri legislator has a constituency of about 30,000 people, to win their elections, on average, most legislators only need 6,000 votes.
Which is insane.
Which is absurd. So the important thing at the end of the day is, look, the world is changing faster than we can even process it on a silly little podcast. So I would encourage you to pay attention to what's going on in your state and your constituency, and get out there and vote for things that you like. Maybe you don't like what we're talking about here today, but definitely go out and try to make a difference for yourself.
The 36% was founded, written, and directed by Adam Childers-Arnold and Brett Combs.
Research and outlining for this episode was done by Ben Sherman.
The presenting sponsor of the 36% is Avian Apparel.
Music for this episode is provided by Purple Planet. You can check them out at purple-planet.com.
Our music editing is done by Burnt Crumbs.
Our ukulele muse is Adam California.
Scheduling was done by Yorkie March to the Sea Sherman.
Our cover art was done by the wonderful Christian Ferguson.
Special thanks to Ben for finally joining the podcast after about 4 months of
Bang, bang.
Initially throwing his resume at us.
Yep.
Also, real quick, on a final note, everyone, like, subscribe, follow, tell your friends, and comment. Also, this is another thing, is that we talk about covering a lot of issues that we never actually get around to. And if there's something that you guys feel very passionate, like the filibuster, throw it at us. Comment, give us your thoughts, because we like to hear them, so we could tailor this more towards you.
Yeah.
Because while, we always say that we don't make this podcast for our listeners, we really do and like to hear from you. So,
This is true.
Anyways, thanks for listening.
As always, I'm Brett.
And I'm Adam.
And this has been
The 36%. All right.
I think you got it.
Maybe we might have gotten it.
It was
Maybe,
definitely
maybe.
behind.
Maybe we did or we didn't. Anyway,
Maybe.
I'm cutting the feed.
All right, I'm done. We're stopping recording.